Hello, friends and family out there in Parent Tween Connection land. Welcome to this evening's conversation with Jessyka Coulter, founder and primary study skills goddess over at Ace Cookie Tutoring. I'm excited to have Jessyka back with us. She is one of Parent Tween Connection's trusted experts. And if you and I haven't met yet, I'm Clarissa. I'm the founder of the Parent Tween Connection. And I say that Parent Tween Connection is where parents go when they don't know where to go. I had a parent call me last week who was like, hey, my kid's dealing with some challenges in school. And I got into a conversation with them going like, okay, well, let's dig into this a little bit. Is it like more of like a psychological thing, like a test anxiety thing? Is it a study skills situation? Is it the teacher is just not teaching the way the student needs? And so Jessyka specializes in study skills, which, we were talking beforehand, Jessie, like sometimes that feels kind of like amorphous. Like what do we even mean by study skills? So I'm excited to have you with us tonight to have that very conversation.
Yay. Thanks for having me back. It's awesome being part of this organization, Clarissa, and I feel like, you're doing wonderful things that I can't do on my own. So it's like, let me help you help everybody else. Yes.
And you know what? The more that we work together, I know you've heard me say this, and I'll say this for anyone listening in. I believe that as the professionals who work with teens, tweens, and parents and families, the more that we have a tighter knit web between us, the more families we can help. And the more we can help families. I think it's not just quantity, it's quality as well. So, all right. So we're talking tonight, it's end of September. So in a lot of places, we're coming up on the end of the first quarter. If we're on, quarters or like semester bases, we're dealing with midterms and all of that kind of fun. We're dealing with students freaking out. I had one of my closest friends message me last week, and her kiddo's a sophomore and super active in marching band. And she was like, oh, heck no, you have 3Ds. You're not going to marching band. Well, it turns out it was like the teachers hadn't updated the grades. Like he's not in the doghouse anymore. But for a lot of kids, it is that they don't have the grades because they don't have a lot of the skills. And I know you say that the number one reason that students don't succeed is that they don't know how to study.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's one of those things where I hear all the time, my kid doesn't like school. My kid thinks this class is boring. She doesn't even want to do this. She doesn't, want to do homework. And it's always a matter of, well, what's the reason why? And also the matter of, do we know how to do the thing that we're not doing? Because if we don't know how to do the homework, we're not going to do the homework. If we don't have any idea how to take notes, when the teacher's like, hey guys, take notes while we're talking about this, it's like, what are you talking about? How am I supposed to do that?
Right. Well, and I mean, I think that's a fundamental, just human thing, right? If I don't know how to do something, I'm not, most of us aren't just naturally gifted at all the things. And if I don't know how to do the thing, I'm not going to be very good at it and I'm not going to like it. Like, why would I? For many of us, we don't like doing things that come really, really hard. Now, there are the people who are like, give me the hardest thing. And that's what I love. That's not most of us. Right. So talk to me a bit about where we even start. Like, how do we diagnose that a student doesn't have these skills? What are the skills? And how do we know when a parent should be reaching out to you? All those questions all together, all at once, and go.
Oh, well, Clarissa, I mean, there's 12 study skills that I teach. So it started at 9. And then the more I worked with students, the more I talked to families. It's like, okay, I'm addressing these other concerns like confidence, like grit and resilience, like self-advocacy. But it's like, if it's something your child doesn't have, we need to spend an entire lesson on it, not just kind of touch on it in another lesson. So we're up to 12 now. And then test taking strategies. That used to be very separate from my program now too. But it's one of those things where, okay, we teach your teen the content and your teen knows how to study, your teen knows how to remember everything. But then suddenly we put them on a test and they don't get the grade that your child could have gotten. Well, okay, now there's something else going on because
absolutely,
where's your teen's brain at? Like, can he show the information and does he actually have the strategies to interpret the questions? So that's now part of the program too. So I hope, of course, that kind of is at least one of the 3 questions.
So let's start. Let's actually go back and go through the 12 skills that you say, hey, these are the pieces that in theory students should be learning in elementary school, right? I was doing a professional development with teachers in the math content area for a Texas exam last week. And one of the math teachers was like, well, this is just stuff that kids should know by the time they get to me in high school. And I'm like, yes, perhaps we could say they should. But if they don't, they don't. So let's go through those 12 so that folks listening in know what their students need to know, especially once we hit middle school, certainly through high school and college. And as you and I have talked plenty of times before, these are skills that go into the professional world.
100%. And I feel like the work that I do, I work with, I used to say 7th grade and up, and I've got a couple of 6th graders now that I work with. And I feel like I really don't think I want to go any younger than that, because the fact is, when you're saying what are the skills they need, it's like, okay, we got to get them through 4th grade. So they're reading and knowing kind of the reading part. And then we got to suddenly go, okay, now I'm reading to learn instead of learning to read. And so that transition is when I come in. And so I teach 12 of them, and they're in a very certain order. So Clarissa, we can always talk about that. But I always start with note taking. And to me, note taking is the most important study skill. Like for me, if you don't know how to take notes, none of the other skills I teach are going to go very well. And we go from note taking and annotating into creating those perfect study sessions to retain information. And then I know ones that parents are always asking for help with are organization and time management. I also get a lot of, help for goal setting and motivation. And then after that, soft skills, which I know some parents are like, how is that a study skill? And that's a whole conversation right there. And then the ones that I've already mentioned. So from soft skills into the confidence, the self-advocacy, grit, and resilience. And I feel like I'm missing one in there, but there's 12.
Awesome. So I'd love to chat for a couple of minutes, Jessyka, about crafting. What was it? The second one you said, the note taking, and then it goes into crafting studies or annotation. Okay, so note taking and annotation, right? And then it goes into crafting a good study session. That's not something we've talked about before, as far as I recall. I know we've had many conversations, but can we talk a little bit about that? And is it like there's some basic concepts that every student should have, or here's how to modify it, or is it like vary by content area? What's your take?
Yeah. So the way I teach this is very much based on learning style and very much based on a teen's interest. And I imagine some of our listeners might have very strong opinions about learning styles. And the more that I've learned, the more that I research, it's like I'm staying with what I do, because it's like, even if there's one way that you prefer to learn, it's like, I'm not going to teach teens how to get better at the other stuff they're not good at. That's not the point of what I do as a study skills tutor. It's like, if your teen naturally learns this way, let's help your teen learn that way every single situation, no matter if we're talking a study session or if we're talking sitting in the classroom. And so for me, when I'm talking like a study session, so I feel like study sessions and the retained information, there's a lot of crossover, but with the study session, it's something as simple as the environment. Like I've got kids all the time that love to tell me, well, yeah, I do my homework in my bed. I study in my bed. It's like, no. Wait, we don't do that. And they're like, why? And it's like, how often do you fall asleep when you're doing homework? Well, I'm always really tired when I do homework. It's like, that's why your brain is associating your bed with sleep, not with school stuff, not with learning. So they're like, oh, so like, that's the first part. And then something like the tools. Like, I'm a very visual learner, so I've got lots of highlighters, lots of colored pens. I've got kids that are like as auditory as can be. And I was like, then why do you have a highlighter? Well, I don't know. Well, what do you do with a highlighter? Well, I like to draw, I like to color on myself. Well, yeah, you're going to be distracted during your study session because you don't need that highlighter. It's not how you work. So I mean, those are two of it. And then thinking probably what you were thinking, Clarissa, like, what are those activities? And yeah, you can Google, like any of our listeners can go find hundreds of study techniques. But the way I teach it is you got to figure out what actually works for you. Like for me is with the visual, it's like, okay, yeah, there's going to be lots of pictures, lots of drawings, but someone who's very kinesthetic, very tactile, they're not going to be sitting still like me. They're going to be up and moving. There's going to be a lot of actions. Like one of my favorites is I love Cahoots, and a lot of people are really familiar with that. So it's one of my favorite examples. But the thing is, the way it's designed is you've got 4 answer choices and you're supposed to click the answer like on a screen. It's like, for my kinesthetic learners, I'm like, why can't the room become your screen? Like, why can't this wall become the green answer, this wall become the yellow answer, and you're just literally moving to the right wall to answer the question? And they're like, really? I can do that? I'm like, make it a game. Like, no one says you have to sit still during a study session. So
absolutely. Can I add a thought in on that?
Yeah.
So one of the best books I've ever written, I don't have it here to reference for anyone who's watching, because I had no idea this is where the conversation was going to go, but it is called Spark, and it was written by Dr. John Rady, who is a Harvard medical scientist or Harvard medical professor. I don't remember which, but it basically pulls together all of this fantastic research about how movement impacts the brain. And most of the studies that are out there, to be fair, at least at the time of the writing of the book, were focused on cardiovascular exercise. But there is a constant correlation, like a definite correlation, enough that they are confident establishing causation, that as little as 10 to 15 minutes of cardiovascular exercise can have a significant and immediate impact on mental processing. So I know, also being in the academic world or like in the tutoring world with you in a different arena, I always tell my students, dude, if you can get out and you can like go for a 5-minute run, or you can go run up and down the stairs for just a couple of minutes before you start, like get your heart pumping, like get huffing and puffing, it absolutely wakes you up. And especially for those of us who have the joy of navigating ADHD, it helps us even more, because it helps us get some of the extra energy out. It helps us get a quick dopamine hit, and then we can sit down and we can focus. And so I just wanted to pop that in as a plug for you along the way, because I know that movement is huge. Talk to me about, for kinesthetic learners, what do you recommend, or have you ever recommended, like assigning different concepts like to different parts of their bodies? Have you ever had students have success with that?
We've talked about it before. I mean, one of the things when we talked about like environment is I tell them to think about different places in the house for different subjects. So like one of my kiddos, she used to study at the kitchen table. She used to like to sit under the dining room table. And then she had a really comfy chair she loved in her bedroom. And so we talked about, okay, we'll decide which chair, which place is the most comfortable. And that's now going to become your least favorite class's place to do work, because now you're going to have a good feeling while you're doing your class you don't like. So that's something. And then, yeah, the different parts of the body, like for me, I tell them to be really intentional with their movement. Like that's probably the biggest thing all like kinesthetic learners have heard me say is like, if they're tapping their foot, if they're kind of, finger tappers, if they're just people that can't sit still, it's like, don't just move randomly. Be intentional. If the teacher says on step 3, okay, we're tapping our foot 3 times. If the teacher, if we're going, okay, there's 10 things we got to talk about today. Well, how do you know which finger you're on for which thing? So that's the kind of thing I've talked about, but I can see, Clarissa, how the other would be useful too.
I know for me, it's always been really helpful for a short-term memory situation, where I just have to remember like facts and figures. I'll take like, if there's 4 things I need to remember, I'll like in my brain, I'll assign the first one to my pointer finger, the second concept to the next finger, like that kind of deal. It's because I'm very kinesthetic. I know musicians and thespians and athletes and whatnot, like we're all used to using our bodies. So it's just something that I've always done. I didn't even realize I was doing it when I was a kid, frankly. So tell me how some of this then can translate as students go through high school and into college, because I know I had a conversation actually with that same dad whose daughter was navigating some test anxiety. He's like, I didn't even learn how to study till I got to college. Right? So how does some of this morph, if it does, as we start looking at collegiate level work and then into the professional world? What would you say there?
Oh, I would tell you that unfortunately, most of the kids I work with are older. I mean, actually, just this summer, my mom reached out to me. Her son had just graduated. And, it was one of those things where he graduated, so we weren't sure he was going to get there. And then it was like, okay, he's going to college, but we're not sure he's going to make it. And his words directly after we were done with the program was like, I was screwed. Like, I know it was not going to go well. And he's like, but after finishing the Love to Learn program, he's like, I'm not feeling that way anymore. And we actually made it. It's supposed to be a 7-month program. But she's like, we really want to be done before he starts college. So we made it into a 3.5-month program. So that was, that was something, trying to meet, several times a week and for more than 1 hour sometimes. So the answer, Clarissa, is that, I want them to learn these skills in middle school, because the skills, they're the same. Like the material obviously changes, right? We're talking about note taking and like a middle school level math class, a little different than say someone that's going to be an engineer in college. But
right.
the 7 note-taking rules I teach, like they're the same. Like that does not change. And if we're talking, how do we use a planner? How do we use a calendar? Again, maybe we only have a couple of things going on as a freshman in high school. And suddenly, like you said, maybe there's interviews, there's internships, all that stuff, senior year of college, but it's still the same process. Like the skills that I used back then, they're still the same skills I use now. And you talk about beyond, like sitting in a boardroom, like self-advocacy right there. Are you going to ask the teacher the question? Are you going to ask your team leader, your boss that question? Are you willing to, present your idea to your group of friends versus, hey, I got this awesome idea in the marketing department. Like it's the exact same thing.
Right. Is there one study skill that you find to be the most commonly lacking skill among students, or is it kind of like all of them or a mishmash?
I mean, I know a lot of people would say some, like everybody knows something, like, some like, and I would say, Clarissa, that I've never had a student, I've done this for almost 10 years now. I have yet to have a teen actually have all 12 skills that I teach. And I got to tell you, I mean, the one that I care the most about is note taking. And that's just because of the fact if I've worked with so many teens that show up without notes. I've had plenty of teens that are like, well, yeah, I take notes, but I don't know how to use them. They don't make any sense. And so to me, the rest of them just don't matter. I know a lot of parents, I always hear about motivation and confidence, time management, organization. But I got to tell you, all of that, in my opinion, goes straight back to, do you actually have notes? Do you actually know what's going on? Do you actually understand the material? Which kind of to me is all tied together.
Right. Okay. So I know this is what I'm asking you is to share a little bit of a behind the curtain into what you actually teach with note taking, right?
Yeah.
There are some of us that use squigglies, and there are some of us whose papers always had doodles all over them. And there are some of us who understood somehow innately not to write all of the ands and does and those kinds of things, right? Can you give us like 3 to 4 pointers for a student of here's kind of the outline of or an idea of what makes for good notes? What should they aspire?
Definitely. Well, you make a good point. Like number 1 is what you just said. So like that's my first rule of my 7 note-taking rules I teach is don't write everything down. And so that's what we talk about is just because the teacher says it, just because it got written on the board, just because you read it in the textbook, just because it was in the PowerPoint, you do not have to write that down. So like that's like the first thing is just become aware of, oh, okay, I can pick and choose. And I feel like that helps a lot with that overwhelm piece of I'm trying to keep up. There's too much information. Yeah, there's a lot of information. You have to know how to pick and choose. And then the other big one would really be the importance of bullets. I cannot tell you how many teens I work with. They're writing their notes in complete sentences. And it's like, why? And they're like, that's what's on the board. That's what I thought I had to do. And it's like, no, like bullet points, 2 or 3 words is totally fine. And then helping them figure out their abbreviations. Like so many kids think they have to write out the complete word. It's like, no, figure out what your version of that word is. Just remember what it is. Make yourself like a little key. And that's all you need. So like those are the immediate ones, let alone always back to learning style. Always, always. The matter of my auditory learners, they got to listen more than they write. My visual learners, they got to have the colors. And the kinesthetic learners, they've got to have some kind of action they do while taking those notes. So those are my big kind of behind the curtains immediate thoughts.
Yeah. Well, but that's, I like giving little tidbits like that. It's almost like little sound bites because that way we're going, hey, mom, dad, as you're listening in, here are things that we bring, professionals like you or professionals like me in my world. Here's what we bring to the table that there's a reason that we do what we do, right? Because our students don't necessarily learn these skills in school consistently because that's not what the teachers specialize in. The teachers specialize in their content areas and not necessarily. What's that?
There's just not the time either. Not only, when they do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So tell us about the summit that you're running this week or the event that you have going on.
Definitely. So it's called Fall into High School and Beyond. And there's 30 amazing speakers that I brought together to talk about everything from ADHD, like you said, to basically all the study skills that I'm teaching, let alone just connecting between parents and teens, because we know that conversation piece doesn't always happen. And there's all sorts of health stuff. So all sorts of the mental health. So like we're talking depression and addiction, some of those serious topics, all the way to things like when we're talking about teens, like in hormones and all that fun, kind of the physical health as well. So lots of topics over the course of 7 days, and it's totally free. That's what I love about it. So
that's fabulous. And how do people find it?
So it's all over my website. It is all over Facebook too. It's probably an even better place. So if they were to go to Ace Cookie Tutoring on Facebook, they would find it in a heartbeat.
Awesome. 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 All right. So as I mentioned, Jessyka is one of our trusted experts at Parent Tween Connection. What that means simply is that she's been background checked, reference checked, and interviewed so that we know that when we say to families, hey, she's somebody that's trustworthy, we've done our work on her, so to speak. Like we've done our background checking and reference checking and such. And she's just always been a wealth of knowledge. So Jessyka, thank you so much for being with me tonight.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Clarissa. This is fun. I feel like we could talk for hours, and it's like, how do we pick and choose?
Correct. Absolutely. Well, and so for those folks who are members of Parent Tween Village, Jessyka and I are about to head into a Zoom conversation, which is going to be recorded expressly for members of Parent Tween Village. And I am scrolling to try to remember what the heck we said we were going to be talking about, because I don't remember what we said we were going to be talking about. My computer's frozen. Can you remind me what we're about to be talking about?
I think we're talking even more about note taking and maybe a couple other specific study skills. So definitely more focused on one skill, kind of whatever, what mamas
That's
might
right.
talk about.
Awesome. So we're going to be diving more into that specific study skill. If you are not yet a member of Parent Tween Village, come on over to our website at parenttweenconnection.com. Check it out. And if you want to see more behind the scenes and more exclusive conversations with all of our podcast guests and all of our webinar guests, come on over and join us. So with that, I'm going to say over and out. Have a great week, everybody.
Mm-hmm.